In the beautiful neighborhood of Peachtree Heights, Atlanta, where every lawn is perfectly trimmed and brick mansions glimmer in the sunlight, the Jackson family seemed like the definition of happiness. Michael Jackson, a 45-year-old successful businessman, was admired by everyone who knew him. He was hardworking, charismatic, and had rebuilt his life after losing his first wife to cancer. When he married Lisa, a stunning former model, 2 years ago, it felt like the final piece of his perfect life had fallen into place. Lisa, at 35, was graceful and elegant. She effortlessly stepped into her role as Michael's new wife and the stepmother to his 20-year-old son, Darius. Together, the three of them seemed like the picture-perfect family. Neighbors would see them laughing on evening walks or hosting elegant dinner parties. It was a life many could only dream of, but the Jacksons' perfect life was only a mask. Inside their grand home, hidden from the eyes of the world, cracks were forming. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. Michael's long hours at work left Lisa feeling lonely, while Darius, a promising college student and basketball star, seemed to spend more time avoiding his stepmother than bonding with her. There were moments small, fleeting, but impossible to ignore. Lisa's lingering looks at Darius, the awkward tension when Michael wasn't around, the way Lisa's laughter seemed just a little too bright when Darius told a joke. These moments were sparks in a powder keg, waiting for the right moment to ignite. What started as harmless glances and innocent interactions soon grew into something much darker. A forbidden affair blossomed in secret, driven by loneliness, desire, and a craving for something neither Lisa nor Darius could admit to themselves. And when Lisa discovered she was pregnant, everything changed. This is the story of how love turned into betrayal, how trust shattered into lies, and how a family admired by everyone became the center of scandal and tragedy. It's a tale of forbidden desires, devastating choices, and the ultimate price of passion gone wrong. Stay with us as we uncover the truth about the Jackson family, a story that reveals how even the most perfect lives can hide the darkest secrets. Michael Jackson was the kind of man everyone admired. At 45, he seemed to have it all: success, charm, and resilience. But his path hadn't been easy. 5 years ago, Michael faced one of life's greatest heartbreaks when his first wife, the love of his life and the mother of his son Darius, lost her battle with cancer. Devastated, Michael buried himself in work, pouring his energy into growing his business consultancy. Over time, his company became one of Atlanta's most respected firms. Outwardly, he looked like a man who had risen above tragedy, but at home, an emptiness lingered. Then Lisa came into his life. She was everything Michael thought he had lost: a beacon of light in his darkest hours. At 35, Lisa was stunning. A former model, she carried herself with the kind of grace that turned heads wherever she went. Her personality was magnetic, drawing people in with her effortless charm. When Michael met her at a charity event, the connection was instant. After a whirlwind romance, they married in a grand ceremony that became the highlight of Peachtree Heights' social calendar. Lisa seemed like the perfect partner, beautiful, poised, and caring. Lisa didn't just marry Michael, she embraced his world. She took on the role of stepmother with enthusiasm, attending Darius's basketball games and cheering from the stands. She hosted elegant dinner parties for Michael's clients, dazzling his business associates with her wit and warmth. On the surface, she fit perfectly into the picture Michael was trying to rebuild. Darius, Michael's 20-year-old son, was the pride of the family. As sophomore at Emory University, Darius was studying business, just like his father. He was handsome, athletic, and a star player on the university's basketball team. Despite being offered a place to live on campus, Darius chose to stay at home, saying he wanted to be there for his dad and new stepmother. His maturity impressed everyone, and the neighbors often remarked on how grounded and responsible he seemed. From the outside, the Jacksons appeared to be living the dream. Their red brick mansion with its manicured lawn was the envy of the neighborhood. Michael and Lisa were often seen taking evening walks hand in hand, with Darius by their side. Their laughter carried across the quiet streets, a picture of happiness and unity. They seemed to have everything a loving family, a beautiful home, and a life many would aspire to. But things aren't always what they seem. Michael's demanding career often kept him late at the office. He loved his family, but the long hours and constant travel created a distance that was hard to ignore. Lisa, left alone in their large, empty home, began to feel the weight of loneliness. She missed the excitement and attention she had once commanded in her modeling days. Michael's absence left a void she couldn't fill. Darius, often at home when Lisa was alone, became an unintentional companion. Their interactions were light at first, friendly conversations over breakfast or casual jokes during Michael's late nights at work. But over time, those small moments began to shift. Lisa's smiles lingered longer. Her eyes followed Darius when he wasn't looking. She began to see him not just as her stepson, but as a young man full of vitality, a reflection of the life she once had. At first, Darius dismissed the subtle changes. He told himself Lisa's kindness was part of her role as his stepmother. But as time passed, he couldn't ignore the growing tension between them. The friendly chats became charged with an energy he couldn't quite explain. He found himself avoiding her gaze, uncomfortable with the unspoken feelings that were beginning to take shape. Lisa, however, couldn't resist the pull she felt toward Darius. His confidence, his athleticism, and his youth reminded her of what she longed for, something exciting and forbidden. The attraction grew stronger with each passing day. Darius, despite his initial resistance, began to notice the magnetic pull between them. He tried to brush it off, keeping his distance, but it was clear that things were no longer the same. Behind the closed doors of their elegant home, the cracks in the Jackson family's perfect life were deepening. Michael, oblivious to the growing tension, continued to pour himself into his work, trusting that everything was fine at home. But the bond between Lisa and Darius was becoming harder to ignore. What began as innocent moments of connection, a shared laugh, a lingering glance, was about to ignite a spark that would change their lives forever. The Jacksons' perfect image was beginning to crumble, and the storm that was building inside their home would soon spiral out of control. The dream life they had built was on borrowed time, and the secrets they kept would soon become impossible to hide. Spring arrived in Peachtree Heights, bringing with it warm breezes and blooming flowers. The days grew longer, but so did the unspoken tension in the Jackson household. Lisa and Darius found themselves drawn to each other in ways they knew were wrong, but the pull was undeniable. What had started as light-hearted banter turned into something much more dangerous. Lisa's compliments to Darius became personal. She praised his charm and intelligence in ways that made him uncomfortable, yet flattered. Her glances lingered a little too long, and her touch seemed more intentional. Darius noticed but tried to brush it off, telling himself it was harmless. Still, there was something in her presence that unsettled him, a mix of allure and danger that he couldn't quite ignore. One warm evening in May, the line was finally crossed. Michael was away on a business trip, leaving the house unusually quiet. Darius had come home early from a party, his head still spinning from a few drinks. In the dimly lit kitchen, Lisa was waiting, her usual polished appearance softened by the warm light. She smiled at him as he walked in, her voice softer than usual as she asked about his evening. They talked, laughed, and for a moment, it felt easy, almost natural. Then it happened. A kiss. Quick, electric, and utterly forbidden. It was a moment of weakness neither of them had planned but couldn't resist. When they pulled away, the reality of what had just happened hit them both like a freight train. The room fell silent as they stared at each other, the weight of their actions sinking. Darius avoided Lisa for days afterward. He buried himself in his studies and basketball practices, doing everything he could to stay away from her. He told himself it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that wouldn't happen again. But the memory of that kiss lingered in his mind, no matter how hard he tried to push it away. Lisa, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about Darius. She felt a mix of guilt and exhilaration, knowing what they had done was wrong, but craving the connection she felt with him. She tried to focus on her duties as Michael's wife, but her thoughts always drifted back to that moment in the kitchen. She began finding excuses to be near Darius, her intentions masked by casual interactions. Their stolen moments became harder to avoid. A brush of hands as they passed each other in the hallway. A shared smile that lasted a little too long, a late-night conversation by the pool that turned into a hurried embrace. Each time, they promised it would be the last, but each time they failed to keep that promise. The secrecy only added to the intensity of their connection. They found ways to meet in the quiet corners of the house, stealing moments whenever Michael wasn't around. Lisa would linger in the laundry room, waiting for Darius to walk by. Darius would find excuses to stay up late, knowing she'd be in the kitchen. The danger of being caught only fueled their forbidden relationship. Darius wrestled with his conscience. He knew what he was doing was a betrayal of his father, the man who had raised him and given him everything. Every time Michael spoke about how proud he was of his son, the guilt hit Darius like a punch to the stomach. He avoided family dinners and spent more time away from home, but the pull toward Lisa was too strong. Lisa felt the weight of her actions too. Michael's love and trust made her guilt almost unbearable. He would come home from work, kiss her on the cheek, and tell her how lucky he felt to have her in his life. Each loving gesture was a reminder of the secret she was keeping. Yet she couldn't pull herself away from Darius. The passion between them had become an addiction, one she couldn't quit, no matter how hard she tried. Michael, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, continued to focus on his work and his excitement for the future. He talked about vacations they could take as a family and plans for Darius's career. Lisa and Darius played along, forcing smiles and nodding at his enthusiasm, but the tension between them was impossible to hide completely. As the summer approached, the Jackson household grew heavy with unspoken truths. Michael remained blissfully unaware, but Lisa and Darius knew their secret couldn't stay hidden forever. Each stolen moment brought them closer to the edge, and they both felt the weight of the inevitable. They were walking a tightrope, teetering, dangerously close to disaster. The passion and secrecy of their relationship blinded them to the consequences that were rapidly approaching. The storm was building, and it was only a matter of time before their perfect world came crashing down. As the summer sun brightened the streets of Peachtree Heights, Lisa's life took a sudden and unsettling turn. For weeks she had been feeling unwell waves of nausea in the mornings, an unusual exhaustion that didn't seem to fade. At first, she chalked it up to stress, but deep down, a nagging thought kept creeping in. One afternoon, she finally faced it. Alone in the bathroom, her hands trembled as she held a pregnancy test. The seconds felt like hours. 2 pink lines appeared. Lisa stared at the test, her world spinning. She sank to the cold tile floor, the reality crashing over her like a wave. She was pregnant. But the worst part wasn't the surprise, it was the undeniable truth that the baby wasn't Michael's, it was Darius's. Her chest tightened as panic set in. How could she explain this? How could she keep the truth hidden? Michael had been nothing but loving and supportive, and now she carried a secret that could destroy him. She knew there was no easy way out. The perfect life she had worked so hard to build was about to crumble. That evening, Lisa forced herself to act normal. When Michael came home, she greeted him with an unusual enthusiasm. She wore his favorite dress, poured him a glass of whiskey, and led him upstairs. The intimacy they shared that night wasn't born of love or passion, but of necessity. Lisa needed an alibi, and she was determined to create one. In the weeks that followed, Lisa played her role flawlessly. She announced her pregnancy over a candle-lit dinner, her voice filled with fake joy as she told Michael they were expecting. His reaction was everything she had hoped for: tears of happiness, a wide smile, and dreams of their future. He wrapped her in a warm embrace, whispering about how wonderful it would be to start a family together. Lisa smiled back, but her heart felt like it was breaking. Michael threw himself into preparing for the baby with unbridled excitement. He painted the nursery, bought books about fatherhood, and couldn't stop talking about the new addition to their family. For him, it was a dream come true. For Lisa, it was a nightmare. Eventually, she had to tell Darius. One evening, she found him in the garden, sitting quietly on the stone bench they both knew so well. His brow furrowed when he saw her approach, sensing something was wrong. "I need to talk to you," Lisa said softly, her voice trembling. "What is it?" Darius asked, concern etched on his face. Lisa took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The color drained from Darius's face. His hands clenched into fists as he processed her words. "It's mine, isn't it?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lisa nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She expected anger or denial, but what she saw in Darius's eyes was something else: fear. He looked away, his jaw tight. "How are we supposed to handle this?" he finally said, his voice breaking. "What do we do?" "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "But we have to figure it out. Michael can't know." The following days were a blur of tension and avoidance. Darius couldn't look Michael in the eye anymore, his guilt eating away at him. Lisa tried to carry on as usual, but every time Michael touched her stomach or talked about their future, she felt like she was suffocating. Michael's excitement was palpable. He would come home with tiny clothes, books on parenting, and big plans for the nursery. He often spoke about how happy he was to finally grow their family. Lisa could only nod, her heart heavy with guilt. Darius retreated further into himself. He spent more time on campus, claiming he needed to focus on his studies and basketball. At home, he avoided Lisa whenever possible. The tension between them was undeniable, but Michael seemed blissfully unaware. At family dinners, Michael would excitedly talk about the baby, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Lisa forced herself to smile and nod while Darius sat in silence, staring at his plate. One evening, Michael looked up from his meal, his brow furrowed. "Is everything okay with you two?" he asked, his tone concerned. Lisa quickly covered. "Of course," she said, her smile tight. "It's just the pregnancy hormones. Everything's fine." Darius muttered a vague agreement, unable to meet his father's eyes, but everything was far from fine. Each day brought them closer to the inevitable moment when their secret would be revealed. Lisa couldn't escape the constant fear that Michael would notice the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. Darius couldn't bear the thought of the truth coming out and destroying the only family he had left. Every kick of the baby, every excited comment from Michael felt like a ticking clock. Lisa knew the lies couldn't hold forever, and Darius felt trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. They were both suffocating under the weight of their choices, the walls closing in around them. As the summer days grew shorter, Lisa and Darius knew they were running out of time. The secret they shared was a ticking time bomb, and it was only a matter of time before everything they knew came crashing down. As the weeks went by, Lisa's pregnancy became harder to hide, and so did her growing fear. She knew Michael's excitement about becoming a father would soon lead to questions. Michael loved to plan, and Lisa could already hear him suggesting a paternity test to ensure their baby was healthy. The thought made her stomach churn. She knew the truth would destroy her family and her carefully constructed life. Night after night, Lisa lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced with thoughts of what would happen if Michael discovered her secret. She imagined his anger, his heartbreak, and the scandal that would ripple through their lives. One night, as she stared into the darkness, a chilling thought crossed her mind. If Michael was no longer in the picture, all her problems would disappear. At first, the idea horrified her, but it wouldn't leave. It crept into her thoughts during the day and haunted her dreams at night. Eventually, Lisa began to believe it was her only way out. She convinced herself that it wasn't just for her own sake, but for Darius and their unborn child. They couldn't live under the shadow of such a terrible truth. Lisa began planning with a cold determination she didn't know she possessed. She spent hours researching poisons, looking for something that could mimic a heart attack. She read about substances that could be slipped into food or drinks in small doses over time, causing a decline in health without raising suspicion. It was risky, but in her mind it was foolproof. She started with small steps. Each night, Lisa prepared Michael's tea. He loved Earl Grey with a touch of honey, and she made sure it was just right. At first, the tea was harmless. Lisa needed Michael to trust her routine, but soon she began adding tiny doses of the poison. Michael didn't notice. Over the next few weeks, he started complaining about feeling tired and unwell. Lisa feigned concern, urging him to take breaks and rest. She played the role of the supportive wife perfectly, even as she watched him grow weaker. Lisa knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed Darius. Late one evening, after Michael had gone to bed, Lisa knocked on Darius's door. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We need to talk," she said, stepping into his room. "What's wrong?" Darius asked, setting down his textbook. "It's Michael," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "He's going to figure it out. About the baby, about us. We can't let that happen." Darius froze. "What are you saying?" Lisa took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "We have to stop him before he finds out." Darius stared at her in disbelief. "Are you talking about killing him? You can't be serious." "I am," Lisa whispered, her voice breaking. "It's the only way. Do you want him to know the truth? Do you want this baby to grow up with everyone knowing it's yours?" Darius shook his head, his face pale. "This is insane." But Lisa wouldn't let it go. Over the next few days, she cornered Darius whenever she could, pleading with him to see things her way. She painted a picture of the life they could have if Michael wasn't there, one where they could raise the baby without fear of scandal. Darius resisted, but Lisa's desperation was relentless. Slowly, her arguments wore him down. One night, after hours of agonizing thought, Darius whispered, "Okay." His voice was barely audible, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had just been placed on them. Lisa's plan was now in motion. On the evening of October 15th, everything was ready. Michael was in his study, finishing up some paperwork. Lisa prepared his tea, her hands shaking as she added what she thought would be the final dose of poison. She carried the steaming cup into the study, her heart pounding with every step. "Here you go, love," she said, setting the cup down on his desk. Michael smiled up at her, completely unaware. "Thanks, sweetheart." Lisa perched on the edge of the desk, watching him closely as he took a sip. But something went wrong. Michael set the cup down, frowning. "This tastes different," he said, looking at her with suspicion. Panic gripped Lisa. She hadn't been careful enough, and Michael had noticed. As his confusion turned to alarm, Lisa's mind raced. Michael stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Lisa, what's going on?" he asked, his voice sharp. In a moment of blind desperation, Lisa grabbed the heavy marble paperweight from his desk. Michael turned to face her. Just as she swung it with all her strength, the sound of the impact was sickening. Michael crumpled to the floor, blood pooling around his head. Lisa froze, the paperweight slipping from her hands. She stared at Michael's lifeless body, her mind reeling. Upstairs, Darius heard the commotion and came running. When he saw his father on the floor and Lisa standing over him, his face turned pale. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Lisa turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "Help me," she pleaded. "We have to make it look like an accident." The next few hours were a blur. Together they staged the scene, placing Michael's raw body at the bottom of the stairs. Lisa rehearsed her story, smearing her makeup and practicing her cries. At midnight, with trembling hands, she called 911. "Please," she sobbed into the phone, her voice cracking. "My husband, he's fallen down the stairs. He's not breathing. Please hurry." As the sound of sirens grew closer, Lisa and Darius exchanged a look of shared dread. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Their lives, once so carefully constructed, were now built on a crumbling foundation of lies and murder. The house was eerily silent after Michael's body had been staged at the bottom of the grand staircase. Lisa, her hands trembling, rehearsed her story in the mirror. She dabbed her face with water to make it look like she had been crying. Upstairs, Darius sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His mind raced with guilt and fear, the weight of what they had done pressing down on him like a heavy stone. At midnight, Lisa finally picked up the phone and called 911. Her voice cracked with emotion as she pleaded for help. "Please, come quickly. My husband fell down the stairs. He's not breathing." The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed closely by the police. Flashlights swept through the house as first responders worked to assess the situation. Lisa clung to Darius, playing the part of the devastated wife. Her sobs echoed through the quiet halls, convincing most of the responders that this was a tragic accident. But when Detective Alicia Thompson arrived the next morning, she wasn't so sure. As a seasoned investigator, Thompson had seen her fair share of cases where things weren't as they seemed. As she stood in the Jackson home, her sharp eyes scanned every detail. The position of Michael's body, the pristine condition of the stairs, even the emotional dynamic between Lisa and Darius, it all felt off. "Accidents happen," Thompson said calmly as she crouched near the staircase. "But sometimes they don't tell the full story." Lisa tried her best to appear heartbroken, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He's been so tired lately," she said, her voice shaking. "I told him to slow down, but he wouldn't listen." Darius barely spoke, avoiding eye contact and keeping his answers short. Thompson made note of his nervous demeanor, sensing that he was carrying more than grief. As the investigation continued, cracks in their story began to show. The coroner's report revealed inconsistencies. Michael's injuries didn't align with a simple fall down the stairs. His toxicology report detected traces of an unusual substance, a discovery that raised even more questions. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Michael's smartwatch, which recorded his health data, revealed a sudden spike in his heart rate just before his death. It was a sign of intense fear or stress, not the gradual decline expected from a heart attack. Detective Thompson also spoke with neighbors, one of whom recalled hearing a loud thud earlier in the evening, followed by muffled voices arguing. The timeline didn't match Lisa's account of a quiet evening together. Despite the mounting evidence, Lisa stuck to her story, her confident facade beginning to show signs of strain. Meanwhile, Darius became increasingly withdrawn. His guilt was eating away at him, and Thompson could see it. She decided to apply pressure, asking Darius to come in for further questioning. One evening, just days after Michael's funeral, Darius showed up at the police station unannounced. His face was pale and his hands shook as he asked to speak with Detective Thompson. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't an accident." Thompson leaned forward, keeping her expression neutral. "What do you mean, Darius? What wasn't an accident?" Over the next 2 hours, Darius unraveled the horrifying truth. He confessed to everything: the affair, Lisa's pregnancy, and the plan to poison Michael. His voice cracked as he described the night of the murder, recounting the moment Lisa panicked and grabbed the paperweight. "She said we had to make it look like an accident," Darius said, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't want to, but I didn't know how to stop her." Thompson listened carefully, jotting down every detail. When Darius finished, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing by coming forward," she said gently. "But you understand this means you'll both face charges." Darius nodded, the weight of his confession leaving him visibly drained. "I just want it to be over." With Darius's confession in hand, Thompson obtained a search warrant for the Jackson home. During the search, her team discovered a vial of poison hidden in Lisa's vanity, the same substance found in Michael's toxicology report. In Darius's room, they found a crumpled note detailing the early stages of their plan to stage the accident. When Lisa was arrested, she tried to maintain her innocence. But as the evidence piled up and Darius's confession became public, she broke down. During her interrogation, she admitted to everything, her voice trembling as she tried to explain her actions. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. "I was scared. I couldn't let Michael find out." The once envied Jackson family had been shattered, their darkest secrets exposed for all to see. The neighbors who had admired them now whispered in disbelief, their perfect image forever tarnished. Lisa and Darius were charged with Michael's murder. Their faces appeared on every news outlet in Atlanta, their story captivating the public. The lies they had told to protect themselves had ultimately led to their downfall. As Detective Thompson stood outside the Jackson home, now cordoned off, with crime scene tape, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the tragedy. A man was dead, a family destroyed, all because of lies, betrayal, and desperation. The truth had finally come out, but the cost had been devastating. The courtroom was filled to the brim on the first day of Lisa and Darius Jackson's trial. Rows of reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked outside the courthouse, and every seat in the gallery was occupied by friends, family, and curious neighbors. The once-admired Jackson family had become the center of a chilling story that captured national attention. The whispers about betrayal, an affair, and cold-blooded murder were now being laid bare for all to hear. The prosecution began with a commanding opening statement, laying out the grim details of Michael Jackson's murder. They described how Lisa, in her desperation to hide her affair and pregnancy, had plotted to kill her husband. The evidence was presented methodically, piece by piece, building a case that painted Lisa as the mastermind behind the crime and Darius as her reluctant accomplice. Forensic evidence took center stage. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of poison in Michael's system, a clear indication that his death had been far from natural. The vial found in Lisa's vanity drawer became a smoking gun, linking her to the crime. Detectives also presented the paperweight that had ultimately ended Michael's life, covered in DNA evidence that tied the crime to Lisa and Darius. Adding to the damning evidence was data from Michael's smartwatch, which showed a sudden spike in heart rate just before his death. It contradicted Lisa's claim that he had simply fallen down the stairs. Neighbors testified about hearing a loud argument that night, details that only deepened the sense of betrayal. The most powerful moment came when the court heard Darius's confession. His voice, trembling with guilt, recounted the affair with Lisa, her pregnancy, and the murder plan she had devised. His words hung in the air like a weight, leaving the courtroom silent. Even those who wanted to sympathize with Darius couldn't ignore the darkness of his actions. The defense worked to shift the focus, portraying Lisa as a woman driven to desperation by fear, and Darius as a young man manipulated into participating in something he didn't fully understand. They argued that Lisa had acted out of panic, not premeditated intent, and that Darius's youth and vulnerability made him a victim in his own right. While the arguments sowed brief moments of doubt, the overwhelming evidence against them made it hard for the jury to see it any other way. Throughout the trial, Lisa maintained an icy composure, her face betraying little emotion. Darius, however, appeared shattered. His head hung low as if carrying the weight of all their lies. His cooperation with law enforcement and visible remorse earned him some sympathy, but it wasn't enough to absolve him of his role. As the trial came to a close, the prosecution delivered a powerful closing argument. They reminded the jury of Michael's life, a life built on hard work, dedication, and love for his family. They emphasized how his trust had been shattered by those closest to him, and how his tragic end demanded justice, not just for him, but for the unborn child who would never experience a normal life. The jury deliberated for 2 days, weighing the evidence carefully. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. The foreperson stood, and the verdict was read, guilty on all counts. Lisa Jackson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Darius, due to his cooperation and his age, received a lighter sentence of 25 years. As the sentences were announced, Lisa's expression remained stoic, but Darius broke down, tears streaming down his face as the gravity of his actions hit him. The fall of the Jackson family was complete. Their story, once one of success and admiration, had become a cautionary tale about betrayal and the destruction wrought by secrets. Outside the courthouse, Michael's friends and colleagues spoke to reporters, their voices heavy with sorrow. One said, "Michael didn't deserve this. He was a kind, hard-working man. It's heartbreaking to think this was his end." Detective Alicia Thompson, who had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, watched the scene quietly from a distance. She felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but the human cost of this tragedy was impossible to ignore. A man was dead, a child would never be born into a loving home, and a family had been shattered beyond repair. The story of the Jacksons became a haunting reminder of the darkness that can hide behind even the brightest facades. It was a tale that left a community shaken and a nation captivated, proof that sometimes the most painful betrayals come from the people we trust the most. The tragedy of the Jackson family left a scar on Peachtree Heights that would never fully heal. The once vibrant red brick mansion, a symbol of success and happiness, now stood silent, its grandeur overshadowed by the haunting story of betrayal and loss. Neighbors who had once admired the Jacksons found themselves grappling with disbelief, asking how such a seemingly perfect family could hide so many dark secrets. Behind the perfectly trimmed lawns and elegant facades, whispers of the Jackson tragedy grew louder. Friends who had shared meals with Michael and Lisa, and neighbors who had smiled at the family's evening walks, were left shaken. How had no one noticed the cracks beneath the surface? It was a question that lingered in every conversation. The Jackson case became a stark warning, not just for the neighborhood, but for anyone tempted to believe in the illusion of perfection. It was a story that showed how hidden desires, unspoken resentments, and unchecked lies could shatter even the strongest foundations. For Michael's friends and colleagues, his loss was deeply personal. They remembered him as a hard-working man, a loving father, and a kind soul who deserved far more than the fate he met. His memory inspired small acts of kindness within the community and a collective determination to ensure his life would not be forgotten. But for Lisa and Darius, their choices cast an unshakable shadow. The trial's shocking revelations left the neighborhood reeling. The once respected family name became a synonym for betrayal and scandal. The tale of deceit and heartbreak echoed far beyond Peachtree Heights, finding its way into true crime discussions, podcasts, and documentaries. Amid the tragedy, important lessons emerged. The Jackson story reminded people of the fragility of trust and the devastating cost of secrecy. It was a wake-up call for families to communicate openly, address hidden issues, and avoid letting resentments fester. The community learned the hard way that the appearance of perfection often masks deep fractures. Years later, the house that once belonged to the Jacksons found new occupants. The neighborhood moved forward, but the memory of the tragedy lingered. For those who lived through it, the story served as a haunting reminder of how quickly lives can unravel when secrets and lies take hold. The Jackson family tragedy is more than a cautionary tale. It's a reminder of how important it is to confront the darkness that often hides behind closed doors. If this story moved you, don't let its lessons be forgotten. Subscribe to Crime Lab Chronicle, where we uncover the untold stories that demand attention. From heartbreaking betrayals to shocking mysteries, we bring these narratives to light, ensuring that the voices of victims and the lessons they leave behind are never silenced. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. And if you found this story compelling, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Together we can learn from the past, support those impacted by tragedy, and create a safer, more understanding world. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines.